the mountains of Highland Scotland. They form a dramatic landscape that never fails to intrigue and excite. They are steeped in a history that is sometimes bloody, sometimes glorious, and always fascinating. This journey takes us deep into the heart of some of the highest mountain ranges in Scotland, from Ben Nevis and the hills to the east, then south to the Moors. The long finger of the sea known as Loch Linnhe, where it meets the fresh water from Loch Leven. The Corran Narrows of Loch Linnhe. The ferry is one of Scotland's few remaining short-haul crossings. A luxurious pleasure cruiser making its way up Loch Linnhe towards Fort William and the locks of the Caledonian Canal. The town of Fort William. Formed to garrison troops, the town evolved briefly into the industrial powerhouse of Lochaber. Fort William now makes much of its money from tourists, attracted by a wide range of outdoor activities. Glen Nevis. No one is quite sure what the word Nevis means. One theory is that it is a corruption of the Gaelic word for poison or venom. And looming over it, the great brooding mass of Ben Nevis. At 4,406 feet, Ben Nevis is the highest mountain in the British Isles. A few years ago, the hotelier Rio Stakis horrified hill lovers when he suggested a funicular railway from Fort William to the summit. Not only is it Scotland's highest mountain, it is also the most popular. Around 70,000 people a year make their way to its summit plateau. A mile or so to the east of Ben Nevis and part of the Nevis Range, the long ridge of Carn Gerach Mionach and Carn Mór Gerach. This is a more adventurous route to the summit of Ben Nevis. The northeast face of the Ben. These high cliffs are some of the most challenging in Europe and have claimed many lives. They are particularly dangerous in winter. A near neighbour of the Ben, Anach Beck. Like many Scottish mountains, Anach Beck is a typical crag and tail formation. Sheer rock to the east side, a much more gradual slope to the west. Most of these mountains were scoured and shaped by deep glaciers flowing from the northwest. Anach Beck is one of only 8 mountains in Scotland that are over 4,000 feet high. Anach Beck sits at the south end of a 2-mile-long ridge and overlooks Glen Nevis. At the north end of the ridge, the slightly lower peak of Anach Mór. Anach Mór is now an important ski centre. Chairlifts and tows cover its slopes. In snowy winters, thousands of skiers and snowboarders flock to the pistes. Winter sports are an integral part of a local economy that is heavily dependent on tourism. Glen Nevis, which runs under the west and south flanks of Ben Nevis. The narrow valley was described by one Gaelic poet as a long, wild waste glen with thievish folk of evil habit. White water of the High Steel Waterfall, one of the highest in Loch Arbor. The waterfall is where the Alt Curry Vale runs into the water of Nevis. On the south side of Glen Nevis, the mountains of the Mamore Forest. The view from the summit of Binnian Beck takes in its bigger sister Binnian Mór, Ben Nevis to the northwest, and on a clear day the lands far to the south and east. Binnian Mór, at over 3,700 feet high, it is the grandest of the Mamores. These hills are bordered to the south by Loch Iltamore and Loch Leven. one of the southern outliers of Binion Moor, the hill known as Na Gruachichen. These hills have a very distinctive character, perhaps overshadowed by the nearby presence of mighty Ben Nevis. Their unique charm becomes more apparent from high on the ridge. Day breaks over Ballachulish and Loch Leven. This is the western approach to the most famous glen in Scotland, Glencoe, a place where the mists of time have wrapped themselves into legends. This part of the journey takes us along the narrow heights of the Anach Aigach Ridge onto Buchail Etive Moor, then to the mountains to the south side of the glen. Glencoe, sometimes known as the Glen of the Weeping, and a place haunted by history. It was here in 1692 that 38 men, women and children of a sept of Clan Donald were massacred by a Campbell-led militia. The murder was seen as a profound abuse of Gaelic hospitality, for the government militia had lodged with their hosts for almost 2 weeks before they turned and slaughtered them. That, as much as anything, gave the massacre of Glencoe its powerful resonance. There is a monument to the dead of 1692 at Glencoe village at the west end of the glen. A few miles to the east, the town of Kinloch Leven, built by the North British Aluminium Company to house workers for an industry now gone. Northeast of Glencoe, the Blackwater Reservoir, created to power the aluminium smelters at Kinloch Leven. At its height, 800 people worked there. The Anach Aigach, probably the most famous and perhaps most difficult ridge walk on mainland Scotland. Difficult enough on a calm summer's day, an extreme challenge to even the most experienced climber in the midst of a Scottish winter. For all its height and difficulty, the Annach Igach is well trampled. Thousands of people make their way along the narrow ridge every year. One 19th century guidebook reveals that local hunters were used to chasing foxes along the ridge, and do not hesitate to perform this trying adventure burdened with both dog and gun. Glencoe from the east end of the Annach Igach. For hundreds of years, this part of Scotland was ruled over by the MacDonald Lords of the Isles, a regime that once challenged the power of the King of Scots. The Buchail Etive Moor, one of Scotland's best-known mountains. It sits at the point where Glen Etive runs into Glencoe. The sheer rock face is at the northeast end of the mountain. From Rannoch Moor, the Buchail looks like a solitary cone-shaped peak. In fact, it is a whale-backed hill that runs a long way southwest into Glen Etive. One of the Buchail's first explorers was John Stuart Blackie, Professor of Greek at Edinburgh University. In September 1867 he wrote, "I mounted the steep, apparently unapproachable Buchail Etive with grand success and very little fatigue." Professor Blackie's mountaineering enraged the local gentry. One wanted him prosecuted under the Scottish Trespass Act of 1865, which carried a fine of 20 shillings or 14 days in jail. Blackie, like most middle-class walkers and climbers of his day, ignored the law until it fell into total disuse. But access to the hills is still an issue in Scotland. The western flank of Beichem Nam Bian from Ben Mool Hallam. The summit of Beichem Nam Bian. This is the highest peak in Argyll. There is a cave amongst these peaks known as Ossian's Cave. It used to contain a metal box into which gentlemen climbers dropped their calling cards. The Beichem Nam Bian has three northern spurs, Annach Dhu, Geir Annach and Ben Fada. They are better known as the Three Sisters of Glencoe. There is an undeniable brooding quality about Glencoe that can be quite chilling. Somehow it seems a place for wicked deeds, although many sunnier and brighter parts of Scotland saw far worse butchery than the massacre in Glencoe. But that was more than 300 years ago. Nowadays, Glencoe is best known for offering some of the finest climbing in Scotland. And where there is climbing, there are invariably casualties. Glencoe Mountain Rescue Team is one of the busiest in Scotland, especially in winter. One of the team's most famous members is Hamish McInnes, a world-class mountaineer and often known as the Old Fox of Glencoe. Ben Nevis, a distant giant seen from afar. From high in these hills, one of Scotland's best mountain landscapes can truly be appreciated. Glencoe, one of the most memorable places in Britain, possesses an ethereal beauty all of its own. In Buchail et of Moor, it has a mountain that could easily be described as a true Scottish icon.